Guten Tag, Deutschland. So, this is one of my first international conferences. And as you can see, I am a little bit nervous, but I am not nervous because of the audience. I am nervous because right here in the first row is my wife. So if you see me trying to adjust my accent during the talk, don't worry. It is just me trying to please her. So, my name is Amadou Sall, and you may not know this, but I have the exact same name as the son of the president of Senegal. So don't just Google me, because I have bad SEO. So if you want to know more about me, you can just visit my website, amadousall.com, or you can connect me on Twitter. And I am a front-end software engineer, and I work for Air France-KLM. And today, we are going to talk about Angular Material or Bootstrap. Which one is the best? Because we all like fights, React versus Angular. So this is not the question today. The question is, which one is the best? So who thinks that Angular Material is the best? OK. And who thinks that Bootstrap is the best? OK, half-half, so it's cool. We'll find out. But before that, I want to share the story behind this talk. So I set out to build beautiful, maintainable, and responsive web application. And I think that as a front-end developer, this is our goal. We want our applications to be good-looking, to be responsive, and we don't want our code to be like spaghetti. So in December 2017, I was frustrated by Angular Material, mainly because Angular flexed it out, because I think that it was a little bit slow, the syntax was hard to understand, and I wanted something simpler. And by the way, it doesn't compile with Ivy, so another point. And in January 2018, Bootstrap 4 was out, and I was curious about Bootstrap 4, so I tried it. And I found in Bootstrap everything I was missing in Angular Material. So I wrote an article called "The Best Part of Bootstrap 4 You Are Missing in Angular Material." So, and this is today my most popular blog post, and most of my traffic goes to this website. So if you see my Google search performance results, people are coming to my website using the search terms Angular Material versus Bootstrap, Bootstrap and Angular Material. That's why I wanted to talk to you about this topic. So we are going to start by talking a little bit about Bootstrap. Then we will dive into Angular Material. And spoiler, we will mix the two. So I will talk about the benefits we get if we mix the two. And then I will show you an easy way to theme your Angular Material applications. So Bootstrap. What is Bootstrap? I think maybe everybody knows Bootstrap. Who doesn't know Bootstrap here? OK, my wife, thank you. OK, that's cool. OK, no problem. So Bootstrap is one of the most popular UI toolkit in the world. And it is built around two core principles. What are these? The first one is mobile first. This means that you start building your application on smaller devices. Because on small devices, you have less space, so you will be able to adjust easily your design on larger size devices. The other one is fluid layouts. This allows containers to scale to different sizes based on the viewport of your screen. And the last one, media queries. This means that you alter your design based on the size of the screen you are working on. So you write some custom CSS specific to a screen size. So in Bootstrap, you have 4 different parts. The first one is Reboot. Then we have Grid, Components, and Utilities. Most developers know about Bootstrap Grid and the Bootstrap components, but the Reboot and Utilities are lesser-known features of Bootstrap. So we are going to talk about them. Let's talk about Reboot. Every web application needs a CSS reset. Even if you don't know it, maybe the framework you are using has one CSS reset incorporated. What is a CSS reset? According to Eric Mayer, one of the first people to build a CSS reset, all browsers have presentation defaults, but no browser has the same defaults. So the goal of a CSS reset is to remove those inconsistencies between the different browsers. And in Bootstrap 4, there is a new CSS reset called Bootstrap Reboot. And it is more than a CSS reset because it adds what I call better defaults to your Angular application, to your applications. For example, by default, the size of the elements doesn't take into account the padding and the border. So it is just the size of the content. And most of the time, all of the time, what we want is this. We want the size of our elements to be comprised of the content plus the padding plus the border. So if you use Bootstrap Reboot, this is the kind of things and many other things that you will get for free. OK, let's now talk about Bootstrap Grid. Bootstrap Grid is based on a CSS standard called Flexbox. Who knows Flexbox? Oh, that's cool. So you already know how to use the Bootstrap Grid. And how does it work? We have a container. And a container is the home for columns and rows. So inside my container here, I have a first row and a second row. And inside rows, I have columns. And columns defines the actual columns define where you will put your content. So here I have 1 column, 2 columns. And by default, we have 12 units for the Bootstrap Grid. And you can specify how much units you want your column to take. So here I have col-5 to take 5 units out of 12, and col-8 to take 8 units. And the Bootstrap Grid is responsive. So it uses major queries under the hood. So here I have col-MD6. So on medium-sized devices, it will take 6 units out of 12, so half the space. And on larger size devices, it will take 4 units out of 12. So we will end up with something like this. So on larger size devices, we have three columns. On medium size, we have 2 columns. And on mobile, by default, we have everything is stacked. Because Bootstrap is mobile first, so I didn't need to put any class to make it work. Then we have my favorite, Bootstrap Utilities. A utility is a single immutable property value pairing. What does this mean? So we have a class, and inside the class, we have a single property with a value. So here I have the important keyword, which may be bad, but I want that whenever I apply this class, I want it to win. So that's why there is important here. For example, for display, we have many utilities for display. We have display dash and the value. For example, we have this d dash block. If I want to make an element, a block element, I just have to add this class, and it will be a block element. We have other properties like d dash flex to make an element of flex container. And the nice thing about Bootstrap Utilities is that they are responsive. So it works like the grid. We have the same breakpoints. So here I want my element to be hidden on smaller devices, and I want it to be a flex container on bigger devices. So if you don't use the Bootstrap Utilities, you will write a lot of CSS to achieve this kind of thing, which is very simple. But me, what I do is I add a class d-none, so by default, no prefix. This means on smaller size devices, it will be hidden. And on medium-sized devices and up, I will use d-md-flex to make it a flexbox container. OK, and we have tons of utilities for display, padding, margin, etc., and so on. And they are very easy to understand. For example, PT5 means padding top. So, question, what does PB3 means? Now, let my wife answer this question, please. No, padding bottom, but nice try. OK, and PY5 means horizontal padding, vertical padding. And we have also things like ML3 for margin left, ML-MD5 for margin left on medium-sized devices, and so on. And the last part of Bootstrap is the Bootstrap components. And this is maybe the reason why you hate Bootstrap. But to me, the main problem with Bootstrap 4 is jQuery. So some components in Bootstrap are built with jQuery, which doesn't fit nicely within the Angular ecosystem. So to summarize this section, we have a very good CSS reset, a nice layout system with the grid, tons of CSS utilities that ease our life as developers, but the components are not so great. Let's now talk about Angular Material. What is Angular Material? Unlike Bootstrap, Angular Material are actual Angular components. They are built with Angular for Angular, so it fits really well within the Angular platform. And it implements Material Design, which is Google's design system. So if you possess an Android device, you already know what is Material Design because all Google applications implement this design system. And it is built by the Angular team, so we can expect the same quality as in the rest of the Angular framework. And very important, it is released at the same time as Angular. So if you are like me, you install always the latest version. This will be a very good argument to use Angular Material. And Angular Material is comprised of two parts: the CDK, the component dev kit, and the Material Design components. So when you use it, you install two different packages at Angular/CDK and at Angular/Material. And the CDK provides first a set of unstyled components, like a data table, a stepper, and a tree that you can use outside Angular Material if you want. And it also provides some services that implements common behavior. For example, platform. The platform service will give you information about the device you are currently working on, and so things like, am I on an Android device? Which features my browser supports? So you can use this information in your application. We have things like overlay to work with pop-ups, modals. We have maybe one of my favorite, layout, and things like bidirectionality. If you want to work with right to left languages like Arabic, this will help. We have things like drag and drop. So an example of the CDK layout. Here I have a class, and inside it I inject the breakpoint observer. So this will give me an observable that will emit information about which of these breakpoints are true. So on smaller size devices, only this one will be true, but on larger size devices, each of them will be true. So I can use this information to adjust, to hide elements programmatically in my TypeScript file. And the CDK is just awesome. For example, for drag and drop, so you have a div element, you want to make it draggable, you just have to add one attribute. So you have to import the module first, but it is very simple. This will make this element draggable. And it can be used to build your own design system, your own component library. For example, if you hate material design, you don't think it's beautiful, you can leverage the CDK to avoid reinventing the wheel when you are building your design system. So next, we have the material components. And the material components are built upon the CDK. So we have things like form controls, navigation elements, layout elements. I don't like the term layout, so layout, we are talking about cards and things like that. We have buttons, pop-ups, and data table. And like I said, the material design data table under the hood uses the CDK data table. Okay, let's talk about theming Angular material applications. Because in material design, theming is a very important aspect. And when we talk about theming, we mean things like typography, shapes, colors. But today we are going to talk only about colors. So I have my theme, which is comprised of many palettes. So here I have two palettes, a primary palette and a secondary palette. And in each palette, I have different variations of the same color. So here I have, my primary palette is indigo, and I have I think, 10 colors inside my palettes. So how to use this? If you use Angular material, you want your button to be a primary button, you add the attribute color equals primary. You want it to be a secondary button, you add the attribute color accent. This is very easy. You don't have anything to do. But if you want to do the same thing for your own components, it's not that easy, in my own opinion. So let's say I want to build this alert component. Here, what we have is, we have some margin here, some padding inside, a border. We have a background color, which uses my secondary palette, so the lightest variation of my secondary palette. And the text uses the darkest variation of my secondary palette. And I want to be able to reuse this component inside another application. So if I build this component for Air France, and I want it to be able to be used in KLM applications, like this, for example, how do I achieve that in Angular material? So the official way to do things, so first step, you define your HTML. So here I have a div with a class myAlert. And I have in my SAS file, I define the CSS for the component. So here I define the padding, margin, the border style, the border width, and the font weight. So nothing related to theming. Then we have another step. We have to define a theme file. So it's a mixin that takes in a theme, my current theme, and I can use some SAS functions to get my palette. So here I retrieve the primary palette, the accent palette, and then I can use some Angular material function to get a specific variation inside my palette. So here I use the 50 shade of my primary palette, here of my accent palette, here the 900 one, and here I use the 100 one of my primary palette. Then we have to import it in our global CSS file, and we invoke it by passing it the theme we want. So inside an Air France application, I will inject the Air France theme, and in KLM application, I will inject the KLM theme. So 4 steps. But I think we can do better. So to me, Angular material is great, but theming our own components can be a lot easier. So I will show you how we achieve that. And inside Angular material, you don't have many utilities. You only have utilities for things like typography and elevation, which is not enough, in my opinion. You don't have a CSS layout system. Of course, we have Angular Flex layout, but to me, it's not the best solution. So you have to write your own. And there is no CSS reset by default. You have to write your own CSS reset. And actually, if you use the Angular CLI schematics to add Angular material inside your application, it will generate a small CSS reset for you. But there is no standard CSS reset inside Angular material. So let's recap this section. CSS reset, 9. CSS layout, 9. CSS utilities, 9. But the CDK is great, and the Angular material components are awesome. So Angular material and Bootstrap. So now the question again, which one is the best? Somebody? Baby? Choose one. OK. So you may think that Bootstrap is better because no CSS reset, no CSS layout, no CSS utilities. But the things that are great inside Bootstrap are not great inside Angular material, but the ones that are great in Angular material are not so great in Bootstrap. So if you are like me, if you are a lazy developer, what you do is you steal from Bootstrap and you add it in your Angular material application. So I am not lazy, I am pragmatic, sorry. So how to achieve that? The setup is simple. For Bootstrap, I have a file that defines some variables. It will help me customize for example, the grid breakpoints. Then I import some Bootstrap functions, variables, and mixin. And this will want to generate any CSS, but it will be used inside the following sets of files. So I import the Bootstrap Reboot, the Bootstrap Grid, and the Bootstrap Utilities. And then I have a little CSS reset to remove some, for example, the outline that is added by Bootstrap Reboot. That's it. And for Angular material, yes, the standard way of doing things, you import material, then you invoke some functions. And I define here my theme, and I add it here. So back to our design challenge. We wanted to build this component very easily. How can we achieve that? So let's now talk about theming our application, our Angular material application the easy way. So how do I build these components right now, today, with my setup, Angular material and Bootstrap? So I start with bare HTML. Then, so it looks like this. Then I add a class, border. This will add the little border here. Then I add m-5. So this will add some margin here. Then I add another class, p-5. So this will add some padding. Another one, font weight bold. This will make my font weight bolder. So these classes come from Bootstrap Utilities. And what I did is I used the same philosophy to extend the Bootstrap. So I have created my own classes, my border-primary-100, to be able to use the 100 variation of my primary color. So I add another class, my text-secondary 900. It will make the text like this. Another one, BG secondary 50, and that's it. So I will end up with an HTML file like this with a lot of classes. So here are the same classes that we had earlier. So border, things that are not related to theming, but rather to layout. And then I have my other classes, and these ones are related to theming. How do I do that? I use the same approach as Angular material. So I have a mixin that takes in a theme. But what I do is I generate utility classes. So for every color in my theme, I generate a class. So I have a lot of classes like this. So here I have my text-secondary 900, so like Angular material. But this, I have to do it only once in my global CSS. Not every time I add a new component. So everyone that has this setup will be able to have all these kind of things very easily. They just have to write HTML, and then their component will be themable. And this is the utility-first approach. And in the utility-first approach, you think about your CSS with classes. So I want you to stop writing CSS today, because I think that in the future, maybe we won't need to write CSS like we used to do. Now I see a trend where we add a lot of classes to our HTML and it works. So, okay, sometimes we need to write custom CSS because the utilities won't be enough, and there is no problem with that. But otherwise, use utilities where possible. So to recap this section, if you use Angular material and Bootstrap, you have the Bootstrap Reboot for the reset, the Bootstrap Grid for layout things, the Bootstrap Utilities, the component dev kit, Angular material components, and with this new theming approach, you will be able to build beautiful, responsive, and maintainable web applications. And whenever I talk to developers about this approach, they have some concerns because it's new. They are not used to write CSS and HTML like this. So some of the questions I get is, what about separation of concerns? Because I have everything in my HTML. For me, it's not a problem to have everything in my HTML, because today we are living in a world of components. So we build only small components, and anyway, we have never separated HTML and CSS. We are just putting things in different files. So yeah, no separation of concern, I think. Isn't this just inline styles? it may look like inline styles, but it's not inline styles. It's more powerful. For example, with inline styles, you cannot use CSS for things like hover, stuff like that. But with utilities, it's standard CSS under the hood, so you can do anything, anything with these utilities. And the last one is maintainability, because you have a lot of classes in your HTML and it can get messy. But to me, this is more maintainable than writing a lot of CSS just to add theming to your application. And one of the benefits we get with this is that we don't need to worry about removing our CSS when we delete the HTML code. Because before, what we would do is we delete some HTML and we forget to delete the associated CSS. We don't forget, but we are afraid of deleting the CSS because we don't know the impact of this action. So this will make your code more maintainable for me. So to summarize, Angular Material is great, but it's not perfect. And Bootstrap can help. If we pick the best part of Bootstrap and add it to our Angular Material application, we'll be able to build a beautiful, maintainable, and responsive web application. So I have 1 more minute, so I want to take this time to thank the conference organizers, because I believe this is the most awesome conference I have been. So thank you very much.